So we are going to talk about the so-called new era of the Chinese and the global economy. So the word new era, the word was on focus was because of the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China held October last year. Okay, so if you know the Chinese political system, you know that the Chinese Communist Party is leading the country. So the party will have this National Congress every 5 years. But the most important ones are every 10 years, in which they are going to have a replacement of the party secretary. Okay, so this national meeting, Congress meeting, has been used to establish certain directions, for the party itself. Of course, the party leads the country, so it's also for the country. So it's extremely important. This is in the middle, 10-year tenure of Xi Jinping. So, the previous one, 18th National Congress, Xi Jinping was appointed as the party secretary, and then this is after 5 years, the first term, so this time there's a lot of new things, and the whole world is watching, and the Chinese people are watching, and eventually what came out from this meeting can be summarized in this one sentence. Okay? That is, the Communist Party of China is going to follow Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. Okay? So it looks very long, but it is actually well written, because we know that socialism is from Karl Marx, then Lenin, then Mao Zedong. So socialism we have this in this party constitution, Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. Okay, so that's the socialism, and then with Chinese characteristic, that's Deng Xiaoping's idea. Okay, so Deng Xiaoping says that we are going to follow the socialist path, but we are going to have a Chinese characteristics. So what's the mark of Xi Jinping? And so Xi Jinping's mark is going to be reflected on these 2 or 3 words, right? The new era. So interestingly, U.S. President Donald Trump was giving the State of the Union address, okay? And he said the following: tonight, I call upon all of you, to set aside our differences, to seek out a common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This, in fact, is our new American moment. Okay, so again, moment, new moment, common English words. But in this context, it is in contrast to Xi Jinping's new era. If you know that a moment is short and the era is long. But I think we do not want to get too much into this kind of reading. Just I think the keyword is new. Right? And for China, it's a new era, and for America, it's the new moment. Okay? So I'm going to outline, today's talk into these 3 blocks. So first, I'm going to give you an analysis of the data, and then I wanted to show you that it's very useful, that the knowledge you have learned can be used to analyze what is happening. Okay, so we're going to spend quite a lot of time to analyze the data, and from the data analysis, I wanted to identify certain elements, certain features that characterize the so-called new era. Okay, so I do not consider a word, new era, as a slogan. Okay, anybody can say new era, this and that. I want to see whether there is actually something which we can call new, and collectively we can call a new era. Now we are living in a new era for China, a new moment for the US, and new thinking, okay? A period of new thinking for the whole world, for global. So in Chinese it's very nice, 中国新时代, 美国新时刻, 全球新思维, okay? So let's just look at the data first. So the data for the whole year of 2017 was released by the Chinese government on January 18th. Essentially, this looks very good. It just looks incredibly good. So, so in Trump's word, enormously good. Okay, huge, enormous. But anyway, you can see that 6.9. The way above the target of the of Chinese government, that's 6.5, around the 6.5 at the beginning. Actually, every year in March, the National Congress for People and then the Prime Minister will give a report, and in the report, everybody is looking at this target. And then we have some other indicators we have learned, right? In our courses, we have learned that we cannot read too much into this very small fluctuation of GDP, but we can look at other indicators to get a true feel about what is going on. So I'm going to show you some of the graphs that you are familiar with. So right after this release of the data, so China's English language TV station, used to be CCTV English. Now they reformulated to call it CGTN. Showed this graph in the TV and in their website, and because for the first time in many years, and so this is up, and everybody thought that it's going to go down as a trend, but last year it actually is higher than the previous year. And if we look at the quarterly data, so we can look at the quarter to quarter, but it's annualized. Then you can find that this is a trend which actually stopped here. When it stopped is about the fourth quarter of 2016. Then it went up. Okay, and so this is a big change. Okay, and this change is confirmed by other data. We have learned the PPI. So PPI is the price of goods out of the factory. So if the companies sell their goods at a higher price, then they have incentive to invest more. If the prices for selling their products are lower and lower, then the economy is very bad. So you can see that it's not reflected in the GDP data. The GDP at worst is like 6.6, 6.5. However, if you look at the period in which the PPI grew negative, it's 5 years. For before the fourth quarter of 2016, the whole 5 years, China is experiencing so-called production deflation. The prices of the commodities out of the factories have been going down every year for 5 years. However, that trend reversed dramatically, since the end of 2016, and the whole year 2017 stayed above 5%. On average, it's 6.3% for last year. So this is very important, because we all have learned that deflation is going to make the economy go to hell. Therefore, you want inflation, okay? And most of the time we will focus on the consumption inflation, but actually for the economy, especially the industrial sector, it's more about the PPI inflation, okay? So this is one. The second one we have learned is about the PMI. Okay, so PMI is published monthly, okay, by two institutions. One is the China's government statistical bureau. The other is the Caixin media. Okay, so we can see that both actually indicators are converging and towards higher. Okay, so we have learned that 50 is the sort of the line above which the economy overall is expanding, and below 50, the economy overall is shrinking. Okay, so here we have the manufacturing sector, and we look at the manufacturing sector, we find that the economy entered a period. Again, it's the fourth quarter of 2016. Okay, then the whole 2017 above 50 and 51, even 52. Okay, so this is the manufacturing sector. But China's more impressive sector is the service sector. The service sector, you can see that it has always been, in the past few years, above 50. So China's service sector has been in expansion, despite the fact that the manufacturing sector has been shrinking. Therefore, you can see that, but you see the trend, right? The trend is going up in 2017, despite a little bit kind of fluctuation, but overall, the trend is up. So both the manufacturing sector and the service sector are in expansion, and actually they are expanding faster and faster. Okay, so this is what, so it's about 50-55 in terms of the indicator. And then export. Okay, so if you look at exports before 2017, China's exports growth is negative. Okay? So we all know China exports a lot, but that was older time. Okay, from 2001, China's entry of the WTO to 2008, before the financial crisis, the growth rate was 20-30% for Chinese exports. So China benefited a lot from so-called globalization. Okay, so that's a fact. However, after the global financial crisis, and even with the end of the global financial crisis, China no longer, was able to export at the positive growth rate. But things got reversed again since the beginning of 2017. Okay, then for the whole year, this bar shows you about 10%. 10% for China is huge, because China's base of exports is very big. So it's the whole year is 10.8%. Okay, so the exports mainly reflects the situation of the global economy, right? Because you export, you want other countries will buy. If the global economy was not good, like before 2017, then Chinese companies could not export that much. Therefore, it's a negative growth. However, in 2017, China was able to export 10% growth rate, despite the fact that renminbi is appreciating, okay, about 6%, and but the other side is even more revealing. That is China's imports. Again, now back to like 20%. So China's import growth reflects the situation of the Chinese economy. Okay, so if we look at PMI, if we look at PPI, if we look at China's import growth, all data indicate that it is not fake. It's true that China entered a very surprisingly fast growth period. And most economists would consider this 6.9% as underestimate of last year's GDP. Actually, it's faster than 6.9%. But probably because in the past 2-3 years, we adjusted a little bit too much upward. Therefore, this time adjusted a little bit downward. So we do not look too much into the GDP, because I call it low frequency, data. That is due to its nature, and also due to the technical adjustment for stability consideration from the government. This growth rate of real GDP is more or less very much low frequency, okay, not changing much. But the high frequency or medium frequency ones, like export growth rate, this is very much you can confirm. Because for this kind of data, not only China reports, but the China's trade partners also report, right? If you do not trust that, you can look at the other countries' import from China, and then add them up. That would be confirming. Interestingly, these two sets of data are usually very different, but still you can confirm it. So I think this is a consensus among all people, international media, Chinese media, experts who do not. Who always say China is good, experts who do not think China is good. Everybody actually now agree that 2017, China was having an extraordinary, positive growth period. Okay, so this, and you can see that on the international finance front, China's renminbi surprisingly, appreciated. To the year end, it's 6.53, but now it's 6.2 some, right? I mean, yesterday. So that is, I would say, 99% of the experts, including myself, never imagined that this could happen. But it happened. Okay, and then China's foreign exchange reserve, which used to be at its highest point, it's $4 trillion US. Then over the years, like especially in the 2015 and 2016. People all go to the banks to exchange renminbi for US dollar, and so for the whole about 1 year, it goes down actually below the critical value 3 trillion. So people thought that this would continue to go down, but interestingly, last year it goes back, and if you look at who are exchanging renminbi for US dollar, nobody. Okay, nobody is doing that. So this is one. Okay, so I think seeing this data, there is a natural question. What is behind this surprisingly fast, good performance? Okay? And I think we want to have a clear, reliable, estimate about the reason. Without understanding reason, we do not know. We do not know whether it will continue or not. But so this is what I'm going to do now. Try to give you analysis. Basically, we have a hypothesis that it could be caused by 3 factors. The first one is the recovery of the global economy. The second one is that the Chinese government stimulated very much in the 2 years before 2017. So maybe there were lagged effects from this stimulus. Okay? Finally, is it possible that actually China is now having some new forces in its economy, which was not there, several years ago? Okay? So those are the 3 hypotheses. So let's look at one after another. So before I go to this analysis, first to remind you, if we want to understand the GDP growth rate, there are 2 theories. Okay. One theory is looking at the short run. Because when you get the data, which is 6.9%, it's both the short run and maybe the long run, right? I mean, but of course, annual data is used to be considered as short run. So for the short run, remember, it's driven mainly by the demand side. So in China, we call this demand side theory the 3-horse, right? Model. That is, the first horse is consumption. Okay, so you group this G, which is government consumption and the private consumption together, and you call it consumption, and then investment, then the net exports. Okay, so if we want to understand the short run, why it's not 6.5 but 6.9, then we have to look at which one actually is sort of overperforming, right? Performing better than expected. A bit longer run, we have to look at the supply side. So the supply side basically is what you have learned, this so-called natural GDP level or potential GDP level, and which can be considered as caused by 2 forces. One is how much resources you have, people, and the nature of the resources, how young the population, how educated the population, how much capital you have, how much technology you have, human resources, and so on and so forth, right? Oil, but the other more important one is that for each unit of resource, whether it's people or capital or natural resources, there's a productivity, right? I mean, the same amount of people may produce a lot more in one country than the other. That is because these people are more productive. They have high productivity. So the productivity altogether, each one has a productivity. So labor productivity, capital productivity, land productivity, together we call it total factor productivity. Therefore, this is called TFP, okay, total factor productivity. So for this one, I came up with a more straightforward visual way to understand it, which I call the IQEQ triangle. Okay. it says that the economic growth potential for a country depends on two things. Okay, one is how many endowments you have. Okay, the amount of labor, the amount of capital, the amount of land, the amount of infrastructure. So this is what we call endowments. Okay, most of these things are endowed, meaning you are given by the God, right? I mean, just you have this geographical position, and you have these things under the land, and you have this kind of people, this kind of culture, and so at any point in time, your endowments are fixed. Of course, endowments can grow, right? If you do more education, you have more, human capital. So this endowment, I would refer it as IQ. But with the endowment, does not mean that you will have automatic high potential of growth. It depends on how these endowments are used. So the effectiveness or efficiency of using this endowment is what I would call the EQ. Okay, so this is the height of the triangle. Okay, you can see that if you have quite high EQ, but your IQ, but your EQ is low, then you cannot get a large triangle. This is probably the situation before Deng Xiaoping's reform, right? In China, we have people, good people, hardworking people, but the resource allocation with this Soviet Union type of planned system was just not working, okay? And then, the efficiency increased dramatically after Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening, okay? So essentially, both according to theory and according to experience, we would say that, the more, you give the market to determine the resource allocation, the better, in terms of efficiency, okay? I do not say in terms of income distribution, okay? But in terms of efficiency, and the market is better, okay? Is doing a better job, okay? So this is the height. So I would like to use this to look at this long term, and actually, you can write a lot of equations and so on, but essentially it comes down to this EQ and IQ, okay? Okay, so we have three potential candidates for driving China's economic growth in 2017. So the first one is what we want to look at is the global economy. Okay? So if you listen to one of my sort of speeches 1 or 2 years ago, I would show you a very poor performance of Europe and Japan. No longer true. Okay, this is the European Union's real GDP growth rate. It's going up, and it's approaching 3%. Incredible, incredible. Okay, and why the US dollar is depreciating, the euro is appreciating. This is probably one of the major reasons, because the exchange rate is fundamentally reflect the relative, strength of the two economies. Okay, so over the years after the global financial crisis and the European debt crisis, Europe was just doing a lot more poorer than US. Therefore, you saw the US dollar strengthening over the to a very high level. But this has been reversed, okay? Because the European Union has achieved a very high growth rate in their standard, right? It used to be like negative. Remember all these policies, negative interest rate, quantitative easing, but now it's out. Yeah. How about Japan? Okay, but the Japanese real economy is now doing very well. It's 2%. 2% for Japan in the past 20 years. No wonder, Abe got so many, votes, and now he has settled domestically. He's now approaching China for a better relationship. That's very smart, because you want to maintain this momentum, and China definitely is an important external consumer, for Japanese commodities. And so, this year sort of is kind of anniversary of Sino-Japan, relationship. So I think both sides have certain intention, to improve the bilateral relationship so that economically and politically, both sides would benefit. U.S. economy, people look at, Trump, and then, then it went down. Then say Trump was not great, and the data was not cheat. Okay, I think we should take a second look at Donald Trump. Okay. He looks like a joke. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's not. Okay, maybe he's not. But I admit, I was wrong about Trump and the U.S. economy. And and actually, it's doing quite well. Okay, U.S. economy because people do not talk about that much about U.S. economy. We talk a lot about the recovery of the European economy and the Japanese economy because the U.S. is expected to be higher than this. So, but it's underachieving. Okay, therefore we do not. But for U.S., such a big country, right? I mean, the number one economy, $20 trillion US dollar, number one, right? China is $12 trillion US dollar, number two. U.S. is almost to China in terms of the economy. So this is huge, like 2.5%, right? And so I guess this gave Donald Trump a lot of confidence and also a lot of support, okay, from his own party and from people. So I think you have to take him a lot more serious right now than in the past. So this is the U.S. I have data for UK. Unfortunately, because of Brexit, UK is not doing well. Okay, but maybe it's a short-run thing. Okay, who knows? But I want to tell you that this does not exhibit much effect on China. Okay, this is the decomposition, okay, of the growth rate. For example, China's growth rate is 6.9%. Then we can do some statistical exercise to find out how much is from consumption, how much is from investment, how much is from net exports. This is the percentage from net exports, okay? Out of 100, okay? So you can see that out of 100, if you look at like 2001, 2002, and it's a lot high. But towards the 2008, it's about 10%. Okay, at that time, still good, right? I mean, 10% of China's economic growth was driven by the external market. However, after that, of course, during the global financial crisis, it's negative. Without the global financial crisis, we would increase more. But this again illustrates that the importance. Whether it's negative or positive, you look at the absolute value of that number to judge whether China depends on global market. Now it's whether it's positive or negative, it's within 10%. Right? It's like 2%, 4%, minus 6%. So this is one data. Okay, we cannot draw conclusion on one data, but this data shows that the third horse, which is the net exports, is not really that essential anymore for Chinese economic growth. And this can be supported by a lot of other data. For example, reliance on global trade, which we can use the export value as a percentage of GDP and the import value as a percentage of GDP. And these two numbers have going down by half, right? I mean, the highest one at that time was 40%. But now it's 20%. China's export value as a percentage of China's GDP is now 20%. So this tells us that China, is relying much less on the global economy. Then we look at what kind of exports. So if you have learned something about Chinese exports, China's exports are classified into two. The one which is the same as other countries is called ordinary exports, which is that you use your own people, you use your own material, you produce things, you export. That's called ordinary exports. But the other one is called processing exports. That is, you do not really use your local materials, or you export material like Apple, assemble in Zhengzhou, in Jiangsu and Suzhou, and so this is called processing export. It used to be that the process export is 55, even close to 60% of China's exports. Okay, so that was during the time of opening to the WTO, entry to the WTO. Then China became the so-called the factory of the world. Then all the multinational corporations outsource their production to China because you can always put the labor-intensive segment of the production process in China. China has cheap labor. China has the scope of producing all sorts of small things and the supply chain and so on. So, but it has been going down, and it has been going down very fast. Now it's about 30% only. You do not need to read the news, and companies, U.S. companies are leaving, and some of the Chinese companies are shifting to Vietnam and so on. One reason is because China becomes more expensive. Another reason is China has grown to a certain level, no longer need this kind of labor-intensive production, right? So this production leave, it's a good thing. And but all in all, it shows you that China is now dependent a lot less on multinational corporations outsourcing, right? And the share of ordinary exports is now 70%. So China becomes more normal. Right? It used to be not normal. That is, you are basically exporting things you assemble, but now you are exporting things that you produce. That also confirms China relies less. And then the FDI, inward, okay, every year, inward FDI as a percentage of GDP is going down, and from the highest 6% to now about 1%. Okay, so in terms of the amount of capital, new capital, right, every year, of course, it's not FDI over capital, Chinese own capital saving. It's over GDP, but more or less it's close. It's about 1%. Okay, so 99% of China's capital is from its own saving. It's not from foreign capital. I want to argue that take this evidence together. The Chinese economy is not driven mainly by the situation of the global economy. In the word of the IMF or the World Bank, it's called a delink. If you rely very much on the global economy, you are linked to the global economy. And if you are not, and China appears to be delinking, in the past few years, and so the conclusion would be that no matter what America does in terms of protectionism and American first and so on, which we have to wait to see. And apparently, this is no longer a globalization era. Okay, whether it's deglobalization era, we need to see. But apparently, in the next 10 years or 20 years, it's not going to be globalization era as in the 90s, in the first 10 years of 21st century. So I would say China is very lucky. That is, when China was having reform and opening in the 80s and in the 90s, and especially in the 21st century, first 8 years, the world is having globalization, right? At that time, we need the market because we produce things, we have cheap labor, we have disciplined workers, and we have high saving. We produce things, but we cannot consume ourselves. So we have to rely on the global market. Therefore, entering the WTO is essential because once you enter, no country can discriminate against you, right? And in terms of trade, so if UK gave US 5% tariff, it has to give China also 5%. Therefore, once China enters the WTO, Chinese goods are just piling in the ports of the European, and everywhere. Because it used to be like you have a quota, you cannot export that more than this much clothes and shoes. After this deal, you can export whatever amount you want. And so that at that time, if it's today's time, if it's the deglobalization time in the 90s, in the first 5 years, 10 years of 21st century, I don't think China would go that far in terms of becoming the number 2 largest economy. So, like a person, a country needs some luck, right? I mean, so this is very lucky. Now, China gets lucky again. I will argue, okay? But the first thing is that now we do not rely too much on the global economy. Then now it becomes a fashion globally that we should protect ourselves, put our own people first. is still hurting China, but not that much. Okay, it's not that big deal anymore. So I think this is the first thing we need to understand. It probably also is a new feature of the so-called new era of China. That is, China depends now a lot more on itself, not on other countries. Yeah. Can it be the case that last year's performance is just a reflection or a result of the stimulus policies before last year? You set a target and you tend to overstimulate. And the policies may take time to be effective, and these lagged effects happened to be emerging in 2017. As a result, you got this 6.9%. Can that be the case? Okay, so this is the second hypothesis. So if you look at the stimulus China used in the 2 years before last year, separate them into the fiscal stimulus and the monetary stimulus. And I will show you data which shows you that the fiscal stimulus is very strong, was very strong, and especially in the real estate sector. But the monetary stimulus was relatively moderate. Okay, so I will show you some data. So this is to decompose China's fixed investment growth rate. So remember that every year, okay, companies will invest in more machines, factory, and so on. So this is called a fixed investment. Okay, so the fixed investment is a flow. The accumulated fixed investment is called a fiscal capital. Okay, capital. But every year you invest. So remember, in this short run equation, right? AD is equal to C plus G plus I. That I is fixed investment. Okay, so the fixed investment is definitely a very important element to push the short-term GDP growth. Therefore, if you, as a government, if you want to achieve the GDP growth rate goal, more or less what you do is to do this government investment to push it. So you can see that Chinese economy went to a very low level, maybe lower than the official data shows in 2015. Therefore, beginning of 2016, the Chinese government look at this, right? Just raise the fiscal spending on investment by the government, okay? Through the state sector, like the state companies and the state-controlled companies. Okay, it does not need to be a state company. It is just a state company with the state capital as the biggest shareholder holding, or actually the government has a lot of influence on these reformed companies. They are no longer called state-owned companies, but they are still listening to the order of the government, pulling this growth rate from 10% to 25%, right? And so this lasts about 1 year, okay? So that definitely has a big effect. But you can see that this is more or less to offset this drop of investment growth rate by the private sector, okay? So here there are 3 lines. This blue line is the whole economy, okay? The growth rate. It's about, used to be about 15%, and now it's about 8%. So that's the fixed investment growth rate for the whole country. But because Chinese economy was so bad in 2015, and there was a stock market crash, and there was renminbi depreciation, and so on. Overall, private sector investment is close to 0% at one point. So this is the time when the government jumps in. Remember, the government now is only 30%. The private sector is 70%. Okay, so this little job, you need a lot bigger increase to offset it. You can see that even with this double, right? This is from like 10 to 2%. This is like from 10 to 25%. Even a double, you cannot stop this overall trend to go down. So that is the stimulus. But the stimulus is basically not giving you new increase in growth rate, but just to offset the reduction of the growth due to the drop of private sector, right? So if it's 6.5%, without this government stimulus, it will go down to 6.2%, right? but the government stimulus is getting it back to 6.5%, but it will not get it back to 6.9%. Right? So this is one thing that is the housing market. Right? And you can see that the government was very determined after Xi Jinping's being the top leader to deleverage, try to make the housing market go down, cooling down. You can see that this is the investment in the real estate. It used to be 10%, then going down about to 0%. But at that time, the Chinese economy went to a very low point. So I guess, reality is reality, right? You get your advisors together, you ask them, if you ask me, I say the same thing, right? To do some demand stimulus. Then the demand side, the most effective in China has always been the real estate, right? So you just do it again. This is the official data, right? I mean, just going from about 0% now back to 10% again. And this is reflected in the housing market. That's the most latest round of housing price increase. Okay, this is called the real estate price cycle. And the conclusion is that all these ups and downs are associated with government policy. Okay, and so when the government it wants to stimulate, it uses real estate, then it goes up, right? Like in 2009, right? I told you the story that this is the time that you buy, and then your price going up. But afterwards, it's too high, and it's not stable for the society, and it started to cool it down. But time comes, you do it again. We thought that it would not be done anymore, but it's done again. So today I cannot guarantee you that whether it will be done again, but the better the economy, the less the government would rely on the real estate. It's not going to be another jump. However, if you read the latest data, it's very much stable. It's not dropping like this one. Okay, I think the government has learned a lesson. That is, it's very dangerous for the housing market to go down. Okay. Like that. I think more or less, if you ask me about the future housing price, I think it's not going to go up very fast, but it won't be dropping dramatically. It's just more or less government wants it to be stable. Yeah. So I separate the local Chinese government and the central Chinese government. So the local Chinese government investment, you can see that it's on the downward trend, but it's not changing much. Okay, so the local governments actually do not listen that much to the central government. So when the central government wanted to stimulate, it moves this up. But wanted to cool the economy down, it moves down. So the central government's investment growth rate changes a lot. Okay, the central government is having a much clearer idea about how to respond to this situation, but it's like in the real world, right? If Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang says a lot of things which is nice, but you do not feel it because the central, the middle group of officials, they do not work in this way. Right? Similarly, the central government can be responsive to the situation, but according to the policy orientation of the central government. But the local governments more or less are not lessening that much. Of course, it's also going down. Okay, so this is the situation. So what we learned from this graph is that yes, the Chinese government did a very significant fiscal stimulus, okay? But it's more or less to offset decrease of the private company investment. When the private company investment actually recovers, right? You can see this is why I think we need to trust the market. Then we look at the monetary policy, okay? So the monetary policy, we first look at this so-called M2, broader definition, broadly defined money supply. What is the benchmark for China? I think it's about 11, 12, okay? And so basically it's the real GDP growth rate, let's say 7%, plus the inflation rate, let's say 3%, plus some adjustment because the money may not be circulating that smoothly or efficiently, say 2%. So that's 12%, right? Or 10 to 12%. So you can see that when the Chinese economy was not doing well, yes, the central bank, in China, central bank listens to the state council, which is the government. So will make it higher than 12%, okay? But afterwards, you can see that it's going down, and right now it's very low. So money supply is very tight right now in China, and this is why when you have your money market account, 支付宝, you get 4.1%, right? That's because this is going down. Of course, we have learned in our class that in China now, there are a lot of gray areas, not just this M2. So one thing we can look at is the so-called shadow banking, okay? So the shadow banking is measured by these wealth management products, 理财产品. We never get accurate collection of data because some of them are very much vague. But more or less, this is it's so huge. It's total wealth management products issued by Chinese banks, commercial banks, is close to 70 trillion renminbi. 70 trillion. 70, 80 trillion renminbi is huge. But you can see that if you look at the trend, okay, you can do it easily in Excel. Okay, I did it in Excel. Just add a trend line, but I do it not a straight line, but I do it a polynomial and a 2 degree and so on. Yes, China was, the liquidity, okay, the monetary side relies a lot on this shadow banking, right? You must have experience, right? You go to the bank, you see 5%, and then you have to put the minimum like 50,000 renminbi and to buy that product, say for 3 months or for 1 year, and then they use this money to lend, right? And this is not recorded under these new loans, and therefore it's not part of the M2, but it is there, right, as a finance tool. Therefore, but if you look at the data, you find that yes, China has increased, shadow banking, but it's mostly before, 2016. Okay, this is in the past. But after the 2016, the monetary side is not really using this as one of the tools to stimulate the economy. So I would say that combine this previous graph and this graph, the monetary stimulus in the past 2 years before 2017 was moderate, was not very strong. Based on this data, I would conclude that despite all these expansionary policies, stimulus, the effect was mainly to slow down the job of the growth rate rather than make it up. So this lagged effect would not explain this 6.9% growth rate that we saw in last year, and maybe even 7.7% growth rate. So that is the second conclusion. So remember, the first conclusion is that the good performance last year was not mainly due to the global market. The second conclusion is that it's not mainly due to these past stimulus policies. Then what is the reason? Okay, so I have to go to the third one. That is what we would identify as the new forces, okay, in the Chinese economy. I would look at these 4 dimensions. One is the service, second is the private consumption, then the urbanization and the new technology. So this is what is happening in China. So you can see that in the past, before 2012, the Chinese economy is dominated by the manufacturing or industrial sector, right? The service sector is less than 50%. But the service sector entered a very fast period of growth. And then the manufacturing sector, relatively speaking, is going down in percentage. So now the service sector is about 52 or 54%. I think last year the estimate is 52 or 55%. Then the manufacturing goes down below 40%. The remaining, like 8 to 10%, is agriculture. Okay, there are 3 sectors: agriculture, industrial, and the service. Okay, so this is of course following the trend of all the advanced countries. Okay, when U.S., UK, Germany, Japan was poor, and they rely on agriculture. then they rely on industry, then now they have 80–90% of their economy on service. Right? So China is not an advanced country anymore, not yet, but it is moving towards that direction. Okay, so this is a new thing. I like to use data from different angles. If you look at one piece of data, maybe you are not that confident that this is happening, but you look at another dimension. So this is the trade dimension. So remember, we have learned the BOP table in our class. So the BOP table would record, all the transactions that across the national border. So in the past, we pay most attention to the trade in goods and trade in goods, right? We say China exports more, and China is the #1 exporter in the world, and but we tend to neglect, the fact that China has been running trade deficit in service all the years. But more importantly, China's service trade deficit is getting bigger and bigger. Okay. Of course, China is a huge exporter of manufacturing goods. Therefore, still the manufacturing sector or the commodity goods trade surplus is still big, right? $500 billion per year. But you can see that this is picking up. That's it's now half, right? This is 500. This is 250, right? The deficit, and it's growing. So if you have learned the theory of international trade, you know that a country's trade depends on its competitive advantage. So China's competitive advantage is more in the commodity sector. China, has a competitive disadvantage in most of the service items, like insurance, and healthcare, especially education. So I do not, unfortunately, have the education data. Whether this is due to education trade or it's due to the true travel, like Chinese people spending money on luxury goods and so on. This is reflecting the fact that on average, okay, it's not like all the people. On average, China is having huge sort of consumption power, and now it's released, through the domestic service sector and through the service trade. Then remember that I showed you earlier that I deleted the consumption and the investment, just show you the net export. So net export, I say it's only like 5% or up or down. So what are demand forces that are driving Chinese economy? It used to be, of course, investment, right? 80% more driving force, investment. But now, you can see that in the past 2 or 3 years, this has been reversed. And out of China's 6.7, 6.9% growth rate, 60.5 of this 7% is due to more consumption. And 40% is due to investment. About 0% or -5% is due to the export sector, okay, net export sector. So this has changed, okay? So the #1 driving force in terms of the short run, okay, demand side is no longer investment, okay? You cannot call China now an investment-driven growth model. It's now a consumption-driven growth model, okay? Of course, it's also driven by investment, but now it's more consumption, okay? So that is 65%, So that's a big change, okay? Everybody knows that, but just to show you a little bit the so-called new economy, right? So these are the top 10 internet companies, 4 Chinese and 6 American in terms of market value. And then if you look at comparing this yellow one is Tencent and the blue one is Facebook, okay? And their revenue, their net income, their business, very much compatible, right? And remember that US is the original innovator, right? And China is a copycat, right? A follower. But the follower is now as big as the original. And the follower may learn quicker, so that maybe it will be a next original inventor. You do not know, but this is what is happening. And then for Alibaba, this is a comparison of this what we call the Singles' Day, 11/11 sale, and with U.S. Black Friday and the Cyber Monday, and I don't think it's a surprising thing for us to understand that the total sort of sale by Alibaba in one day doubles the Black Friday and the Cyber Monday together, so this is part of the so-called service, right? A new service, and that is booming. I remember in 2016, we still carry some cash or credit card. Now I don't think most of us do not carry anything, right? Just a phone to pay. So this definitely changes things. So these previous slides are telling you what? Are telling you basically the short-run demand side. Okay, so we're arguing that despite the fact that investment demand is probably going down, right? And but the consumption demand is picking up so fast, and percentage-wise, it's now 60.6%, 65%. Therefore, that is driving up, the short-run GDP. But other than the short run, there is also the long run. So one aspect of the long run is the percentage of urban people. This is underestimated because that is the number of people who register as urban resident. But there are many people in the street, you can see, all these people who deliver these goods to you, maybe most of them are not listed, registered as the urban people, but they are now in this, in Shanghai, in big cities, and so this is phenomenal, okay? So I want to tell you why this is so important, other than the usual thing. So I will entertain you with some new model. Okay. So allow me to go a little bit towards the academic world. Okay. So this is the leading macroeconomist of our era. Okay. So we know that the father of macroeconomics is John Maynard Keynes. And the next big guy is called Milton Friedman. Okay, and so after Milton Friedman, who is the leading macroeconomist? This guy. Okay, is still alive, about 80 years old. Yeah, professor of University of Chicago. This Professor Robert Lucas. Won Nobel Prize 1995, well deserved, and his contribution is to have invented the so-called rational expectation macroeconomics, okay, which we do not have chance to touch on. It's more PhD level stuff, and the endogenous growth theory, which I will just tell you a little bit here. Those are two very fundamental breakthroughs in economics, in macroeconomics. Yeah. So I show you a very little simple model without mathematics. Okay, so Lucas wrote a beautiful small model in 2009. Basically, he wanted to explain why countries are having different level of income, why some countries are growing fast, some countries not growing fast, with one little mathematical model. With one mathematical model, explain the whole world. Okay. So basically, the model would contain these two elements. The first is that it is assumed that in the whole world, 200 countries, there's one country which leads in technology innovation, say the United States. Okay, then mathematically, or we can show growth rate of technology in the world is equal to the growth rate of population of the whole world. The reason is because that the most talented people who innovate is a fixed percentage of the population. That's the assumption. Okay. So now we have 70, right? We have 7 billion people, right? And so 7 billion people times 0.0001%, and that's the and then that growth rate happens to be around 2%. Okay. So the technology on average will grow at 2%. Of course, some years it will grow faster, and this is the leading country. Then the other countries are basically learning from this leader. So when you learn from the leader, how much you learn? So in this model, Robert Lucas says that there are 3 major things that determine how much you learn. Okay. The first is how further away your country is from the technology frontier. Okay, this is called a technology gap. Okay, the further away, the more you can learn, right? I mean, so easier you can learn. So that's called the advantage of backwardness. Okay, the more backward, the more advantages. China is a living proof. That is, when China was opening, China was way behind, right? But this technology gap actually is helping China to achieve 12% growth rate. Now the gap is lower. Everything else being equal, China just cannot grow at 12% anymore. The second one is people who migrate to city. Okay, so he considered this as the essential part of human capital accumulation. Okay, so more people, of course, in the cities, there is more better educational facilities, right, and better information exchange and so on. So this is one. But the third one is even more interesting. That is city, people together is creating something called a learning externality. That is, this is easy to explain, right? All you guys come from 30 different countries. You come to CEIBS, everybody would express different things, and you learn from each other a lot. That's called the learning externality. Okay, so we advance. Even in the Chinese older wisdom says that not only you need to read 100 books, you need to travel 100 miles, right? And why? Because seeing a lot of things stimulates, and meeting people stimulates your mind. That's all called the learning externality. So if it's the small village, you live grandpa, father, and you do not learn a lot. But if you go to even the county, right? I mean, and you learn a lot. And this is why we learn a lot when we left China to US. And the same thing applies to this country, people who live in the mountain and so on. They went to the city suddenly. So this is huge. So mathematically, actually, Lucas can use this model to replicate the whole world. Okay, it's a beautiful paper, But I want to go a little beyond. Okay, we all know this guy. He has app which is basically disseminate knowledge. He has different peoples producing this kind of knowledge products for this app. And the Economist he got was Dr. He Fan, who works in Beijing. And he's one of the very good Chinese economists. So Dr. He Fan come up with this theory. China is not good at innovation from 0 to 1. We can call it original innovation. But the Chinese are very able to do 1 to 100 and 1 to n. Not an academic paper, but he did write a paper which he calls this is the innovation of poor nation. This is the innovation of rich nation. Okay, that's what he calls. But anyway, I don't think that matters. But I think it's very much good to classify the 0 to 1 type of innovation and the 1 to 100 type of innovation. This is very beneficial to China. Okay, so that's one thing. I think most Chinese students would recognize this person, Li Kai-fu. Okay. So Li Kai-fu is Taiwanese, and he's a very good, famous venture capitalist. But he's more famous for being guide to youth. So this is translated from the Chinese, and basically he says that China has a very unique model. This is called a rapid trial and error model. Okay? In his speech, he mentioned the 4 things that the Western should learn from China. Number 1 is China is having a rapid trial and error model. Now, in this new technology age, a lot of things, you cannot design, polish, make it perfect, then release. That is the 20th century. At that time, out of the whole world, Japanese, German are very much capable of polish, making it perfection, using 20 years, 50 years. Li Kai-fu says this is no longer the world. In today's world, all is about speed. it's not about how perfect you make it. If you are slow, you are done. Nokia, right? Sony, right? And Japanese company. So suddenly Japanese lose their core competitiveness. That's called unlucky, right? But you had your own time, right? But suddenly Chinese never are patient, right? Try this, try that, and jumping from here to there. But suddenly this bad thing that people criticize becomes an advantage. In the past, saving a lot is a virtue, right? Today, we say spending more is good for the economy, right? In the past, stay there, be concentrated and polish, making it perfect is a virtue. Now, it's not. Being fast, looking around and doing 70% is not a virtue because of speed is not. So I think this is a very useful insight. After seeing their insights, I wanted to get my own, right? So I invented this, okay? China's 3S advantages in the new technology era. Okay, so you are the first group of people who see this. Okay, it's not a big deal, but I think put it together is useful. That is because of this nature of the new technology era. Depending on big data, depending on artificial intelligence, depending on mobile phone, 4G, 5G, and so on. Suddenly, these three things becomes very much valuable, more valuable than in the older time. First is scale, right? Why scale? Platform economy, right? You have a platform like Tencent. You wanted to watch the sports games in Tencent, sports, and then it shows you like 5 minutes, then it stops, says pay the annual fee or monthly fee. But it's very cheap, right? Imagine if this is in Denmark or in Belgium, right? You just cannot get this big base so that you charge it so cheaply. So I think now, in China, apparently people are paying membership fee. In the manufacturing age, China has advantage in scale. But in the new information technology age, China have even bigger advantage in scale. Then the second S is scope. What is scope? Scope means that different things relate to each other. You do it in a bigger way, such as you have a production chain. You can cut the production chain into 100, right? And China can have each one produced by a village, right? In Zhejiang, and the whole production chain can be done in one area. So transportation, everything, communication is very easy, right? So if you think China is too expensive in labor, then you want to ship this production to Vietnam. You cannot ship the whole thing there. You ship one, then you are in big disadvantage, okay? So this is called the economies of scope. That is different activities, being done in same place provides low cost, right? And if you do each thing separately in different countries, the cost is huge. But if you put things in one place, you can do this. But where is the advantage? China. Because over there, you need all the workers, you need the technicians, you just do not find another place other than maybe India, to do this. And so this becomes an advantage. Then the third one, this is what I learned from Li Kai-fu, okay? Suddenly I feel, can we call it advantage or economies of speed, okay? You probably do not have this concept when you Google and, because what is economics of speed? The first two are very much conventional definition. Okay? But the third one, but I think, economies of speed. And this actually is to the advantage of the Chinese, even the nature of Chinese people, okay? Not being able to, concentrate to do one thing, they always jump around. Maybe that becomes an advantage because you do the try and error fast, because you learn from the try and errors. other countries, especially advanced countries, have a lot of legal restrictions on safety, regulation, and China has less, right? Although the government is so strong, but China's regulation, for example, on the mobile payment safety, right? And is much less. Therefore, you use Alipay, you use WeChat Pay, but in other countries, in order to have these kind of things, you have to go through the legal procedure and a lot of things. So, is it good, the Chinese system? We cannot say that. We can only say that this kind of system happens to be more productive than the more formal system. So I think the 3S advantage is kind of summary of what has been discussed by many people in more like informal way. I want to make it a little bit formal by calling it a 3S advantage. Okay? So therefore, it's very interesting, okay? And we have learned something called the potential GDP growth rate, okay? And according to theory and according to all the history experience, countries as they grow, as they become more advanced, becomes more rich, they will see lower and lower growth rate. So China will not be an exception, okay? And so this trend is the so-called potential GDP growth rate trend is going to be there. However, you do not think mechanically that this is going to be a linear trend. It will be a trend towards lower, but in certain sub-period, it may deviate. Okay, so I have a sense, I cannot prove it, but based on what I've been doing and watch, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, China's annual GDP growth rate may be higher than the trend. Okay, has a good possibility because of the new elements. Because the new sort of momentum, new elements, they accumulate, and last year it was kind of breakout, okay? And so you see a jump. And we do not know how long it will last, but I think it will last for a while, right? If it lasts for a while in terms of like more consumption intention, more service, more new economy, and so on, okay? Then China may be able to enjoy something above this sort of trend. So I think this is something new. For the short run, in the past number of years, I was not optimistic. But for the first time, seeing last year's data and have some analysis, I feel that in the short run, there will be. The long run is still going to be depending on the trend, which is China's innovative capability, the world technology, and so on. It has nothing to do with the demand side. But in the short run, both the long run momentum and the short run momentum seems to make China able to be a little bit higher, maybe 0.4% high. So you would drop to 6.2, but now you can keep it at 6.6. Right? I mean, so it's a big difference, okay? And I'll show you that it is huge, okay? So my conclusion from this analysis is that this 6.9% growth rate in last year is actually mainly driven by some new economic forces, okay? Related to China's structural transition, okay? And, despite the government is always saying, we are doing the transition so on, I think it proves again that we do not fight with the market, okay? Actually, if the government was able to predict these new forces, the government would not set the growth rate at around 6.5%. It's precisely because the government did not predict that, but it happened. That shows that the market has its own dynamic. It has its own, driving force. Even a good economist may not be able to, detect it at the beginning, but it will happen, right? I mean, so I think there are some underlying forces that people neglect about the Chinese economy. Now they emerge, And these are good forces, and which will bring China a little long, towards this journey towards this so-called high-income country. So I mentioned here also the 1-2-N type of innovation and entrepreneurship, and these 3S advantages. And this will carry China for quite a few years. Okay. So briefly, okay, I want to be balanced. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just discussed by a lot of people. That is, there's a possibility that the whole thing that I'm talking about, which is quite bright, this may be destroyed by certain things, what we call risks. Okay, so apparently we know this China's debt ratio is very high. Okay, China's shadow banking amount is so high. Okay, and China has very high real estate price, which is a bubble for sure. And then China could go wrong. For example, if we back in spring 2015, this was what happened in China, stock market crash. So I think this teaches everybody a lesson, including the Chinese government, that no matter how strong you are, okay, when the financial market is going one way, and you cannot stop. So this is what could happen, right? And I think that the government learned a great lesson from this. The other one is this, all in 2015, right? The first half was this stock market crash. The second half was this renminbi depreciation, and then the massive amount of capital outflow, as we learned from the BOP table. This is the official recorded capital account balance. Used to be positive, but that is about 400 billion, okay, every year. Then we also have discussed that there's this net errors and omissions, which may measure this illegal outflow. Adding the illegal outflow, you can see that these two added, you can see that it's close to 700 billion US dollar. Suppose you have traded a surplus 200. So every year you lose 500 billion. 1,000 billion is 1 trillion, right? 500 is half a trillion. Every year half a trillion, you have 3 trillion, 6 years. Gone, right? So this is a huge risk. So we cannot underplay it. But the good news is that because of the surprisingly good economic performance, then the government now can deal with these things directly. And otherwise, when the economy was bad, you have to continue to stimulate, and these things will continue to accumulate. So that was. So the risks are there, okay, are big, but it is contained, and it is less alarming because of the good economy, but things may change, okay? So this is reflected very much in what Zhou Xiaoshuan says. So this guy is China's Alan Greenspan, okay? So Alan Greenspan was a US Fed chairman, central bank governor for 19 years, okay? So he is serving his 15th year. Basically, he says that China is very close to a Minsky moment. Minsky is an economist who developed a theory which shows that when certain things have accumulated, then it will come to a sudden collapse. Okay, so this is later on called the Minsky moment. So Zhou Xiaoshuan said it openly that China is close to a Minsky moment if we do not, deal with these leverages. So allow me to entertain you with another model. Okay. I think it's a useful model, and I did not get a chance to teach you, but this is called multiple equilibrium. Okay, so you have learned all the models are single equilibrium. Okay, demand and supply crossing one point, but mathematically, like this one, it can have two, even more equilibrium. And not just mathematically, mathematics is a way to mimic the real economy forces. So you can show, this is like based on the Solow model, which is a simple growth model. You can show that there can be a high equilibrium and a low equilibrium. Then the question is, which equilibrium a country will go? Okay. So I have no time to elaborate on that. But basically, in economics, it's not a mainstream economics, but there are people who advocate this so-called big push solution. The big push means that when the economy is somewhere here, right? You go there, depending on a big push. And you can call Deng Xiaoping, he did a big push, so over there. But the idea actually is easy to understand, okay? That is, if when the automobile was introduced in Japan, then the government or there's a regulation which says that you drive on the right, then everybody drive on the right, right? In America, you drive on the left, then everybody drive on the left, right? So driving on the right side, driving on the left side are two equilibrium. Which one you go, depending on the initial push, right? Maybe it's a very, very small initial push. Just happens that the first car, which was designed by a person, the person just likes to be there. Okay? So this is the wisdom, okay, which I have no time, but I want to tell you that this is why I think we should feel fortunate to have Xi Jinping as the leader, okay? At this moment of the world economy, and we need strong leaders, which will give this positive energy towards, okay, the bigger push. And this can be said not about Xi Jinping, but also about Trump. So I have second thoughts now about Trump. People say something very interesting, that is, if Hillary Clinton were elected, the US economy would be as good, and the stock market would be as good. Okay? If you know the multiple equilibrium theory, you will not agree with that argument. Okay? And it's just that, including myself, when Trump was elected, I thought that he would lead us to the lower equilibrium. That was the misjudgment, which I admit now. I lost a lot of money because of that. And now I admit that, Trump's being elected due to some things that we may not fully understand, is leading to a push towards the high economy. Okay, you do not like him. He has a lot of things you don't like, but that is a fact. That is, now you have to agree that this momentum will continue. And do not bet against, some of his, he is going to, after the tax reform, he is going to spend 1.5 trillion US dollar on renewing infrastructure, okay? China has 3 trillion US dollar reserve. Trump says he will spend 1.5 trillion on infrastructure, okay? We all laughed at him when he was saying tax cut. He did it, okay? We all laugh at him about building a wall. Okay, he will do that. So I think you should take a second look, and it's not about whether we like him or the media like him or whether he represents the trend of the human being. It's about whether he is leading to a high equilibrium or low equilibrium. If most people, or most important or most relevant people, are believing that he is moving towards high stock market equilibrium, everybody buys stocks, then stock go up, right? It's not about a bubble. It's just it goes up. Similarly, you see, now everybody likes this word, new, right? New India, okay? So new era for China, new moment for America, new India, right? And then Ambe did a fantastic job in terms of getting the Japanese economy up, right? I mean, so you have to give him credit, right? So all in all, I think in this era, we call new era, we need leaders who will be able to lead their people, no matter what way, okay, towards a high equilibrium. Okay, so that is very much needed. Okay, so let me just go back to finish up a few slides. Then we are finished. Okay, the English translation is not good. It's a poem. Okay, so Xi Jinping was having a poem. The poem basically says that no matter what the outside environment is, I will stick to what we do. Basically, that's the poem. Look at what's the English translation. That is, I'm going to fill the universe. Okay? So threatening. Okay? This is not the message China wants to send to other countries. This is not the message Xi Jinping was sending in Chinese. So please, translate better, right? The confidence comes from the fact that China was growing faster. Okay, I always did this math for Xi Jinping. That is how much he would need to fulfill his promise of doubling the income. So for 10 years, go from 1 to 2. Okay, so these data are realized. So those are 3 years left. So now you only need 6.5, 6.2, which in my calculation it's achievable. Okay, so with this calculation, Xi Jinping becomes very confident. Right? I do not worry about the growth anymore. I'm dealing with financial risks, innovation, consumption. This is now, he openly says it, right? Those becomes a priority, okay? So I think to summarize what I wanted to say, through this analysis, I don't have enough time to do the global side, but all in all, my belief is that this name, New Era, is not something which we just created to define the Chinese Communist Party into this new guiding sort of philosophy. It's more general. Okay, I think China is entering a new era, which means that we pay less attention to this growth. In Chinese government's words, we pay more attention to high quality growth, right? And then the containing risk, then so on. Okay, so this is the new thing. I think the new thinking, and the global similarly. Okay, because in the past 6-7 years, it's all about monetary stimulus. QE, negative interest rate, but that has gone to the end. Okay, I think it's the end of quantitative easing. Then all the countries will compete on the supply side. Okay, so the whole thing is not about supply side. So competing on the supply side is the characteristic of the new era of the world in the next few years. So you do not discount Trump, because Trump, is actually paying attention to that. Okay, and he's paying attention to try to build, on the supply side. Okay, so I think this is we should sort of not underestimate him. Similarly for the other leaders, especially Indians Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister, they are also focusing on that. Okay, so it's a new game. It's a new game. Okay, so China somehow is leading that moment. So this G20 summit, the theme, which I like very much, especially in Chinese, but in English is also fine. But I wanted to link these 4 words to the 4 main ideas of what we call classical economics. Okay, so remember, it's the so-called failure of the classical economics that led to the Keynesianism, that led to this macroeconomics. I think the 4 ideas related to the 4 greatest classical economists, right? Schumpeter's idea of innovation, right? And Adam Smith's idea of make the economy more vigorous by free market, and David Ricardo's idea of competitive advantage trade benefits all, right? Interconnection. And don't forget Karl Marx, he is still there. That is, you cannot have too much income, wealth, inequality. Okay, you need to be inclusive. Okay, so I think if we read these ideas in a more modern way, I think they have lots of value. Okay, to today's world, and so this is what I think is a good new era. And as I said, that China has defined a new era, and Trump mentions a new moment, and the others are also mentioning this, that. And I think all in all, we are entering a period of new thinking. Okay, and the new thinking is in economics is back to this older thinking. Okay, older thinking. Okay, and to focus more on the supply side, making the economy more innovative, making the economy more live, making the economy more related to each other, and making people enjoy more fairly the fruit of growth. Okay, and I think this is what I would say. I think so to conclude, I think. Every generation has its fortune, and so you probably would be regretful that you missed maybe the initial boom of the stock market, the 10-year boom of the real estate, and so on. But new things are coming, and coming very quickly. And if you miss the new things, it's your own fault. Thank you very much.